Ladies and gentlemen, I do believe we are live. Good evening and welcome. I'm Adam Steele and this is, Studio B of Hoppole Studios. Usually you'll see me in my big, nice, shiny studio, but for this evening I am at home in my little box room. As it happens, I've been doing our weekly podcast from here, but now it's time to show you something very interesting. We have a first look on the release date for iZotope's Ozone 9. I've been very grateful to be involved in the beta testing process, which means I've helped iron out a couple of bugs which are no longer there, which also means I've had a little bit of time to have a poke around and see what's new in Ozone 9. So we're going to talk about all that this evening, what's new, what's changed, what's not changed, what's been upgraded, and so on. Let's go. Okay, so as stated in the title, this is a first look video. This isn't a comprehensive review, and it's not a properly scripted what's changed video. I'm going to film them later this week, get them out as soon as I can, but I wanted to make sure that I drop this on release day so that all the work that we've been putting in, we had something to show. I've had to change computers at the very last minute. The one that's behind the laptop I'm streaming off decided to die 3 times during this evening's Hot Pole Position podcast, so that's going to be going in the garbage heap, and a new one will be spec'd out appropriately. In the meantime, though, let's talk about what we're here to talk about, and that is this thing right here. This is Ozone 9. I'm currently shelling this inside Reaper. I've loaded up a couple of tracks, although it is also usable as a standalone program. It's not something I've ever particularly felt that I enjoy, but the option is there. One thing that I did notice about the standalone version that I quite liked is you can drop VST plugins in to the chain of effects that are going in Ozone, because Ozone is modular. And that brings me to the first massive change that I've noticed. I don't know if this was new in Ozone 8. I don't think it was, because I've used 8 a lot, but it's definitely here in 9. Something that always stressed me out about Ozone is over the years they've added more and more of these really great modules, and you've only been able to use 6 of them at once, which has been very limiting, if you'll pardon the mastering pun, and has meant that sometimes I've actually had to run 2 copies of Ozone back to back, which has been very irritating indeed. Whereas now I can drop as many of these modules in, and it gives me a drop down rather than that old block list as I like. And as I hit that's 4, if I go to 6, now it moves along and I can add more and more and more of them. So if I wanted, I could probably have them all running at once, which is probably overkill, but it's a very nice thing to be able to do, because I've always found when I'm doing mastering work, and I'm sure a lot of mastering engineers will agree, that often the best case is to use a little bit of something and then use a little bit of something else and a little bit of something else, and be very gentle and have a soft touch if the material you've been given was of a very high standard to begin with. Because otherwise, if you use too much of one particular tool, it can become very obvious very quickly, which then defeats the point of good mastering. Now, Ozone has been developed now to not just be for mastering, which is of course what it is best known for, but some of these new modules, it sounds like these might work quite well on individual channels, which if you buy the advanced version of Ozone, you do get each separate module as its own plugins, whether that be VST, AAX, whatever it is that you need, it's all available. That's before I even start hitting play. So the fact that I can queue up all these different things is great. The maximizer is, as far as I can tell, exactly the same as it was in Ozone 8. So, being completely honest with you, if all you need from Ozone is the limiter, and you have Ozone 8, then you probably have all you need. But then that's not really what Ozone's ever been about. It's never really been about one particular part of it. It's a workflow. And I actually quite like that workflow from Ozone. When I'm doing mastering work, it does tend to end up being the centre of my mastering process most of the time. Just because the workflow in here is so well geared towards mastering. Like, there are EQs that are very gentle and can be analog or digital, can be phase agnostic, can be quite nice sounding, or they can be very clinical if you want that. Some of the older modules, there's dynamics, which I don't think has changed in this particular iteration. Where the mid-side buttons are have all changed to the top. I think pretty much all of the plugin modules can now do mid-side, and that's a good thing. Although I know that Dynamics has been able to do mid-side for a long time. Each particular module has its own plugin presets as well. By the way, if I'm talking a little bit funny, I've kind of had to cobble this stream setup together in a kind of a slapdash fashion, so there's a bit more latency on the mic than I would like, and it's messing with my ears a little, so if I do end up talking like a robot at any point, that's why. But, like I was saying, each particular one of these modules has its own presets, so you don't have to get a massive preset for the entire thing that destroys what you were doing. And I've never really been a preset person, but when I'm getting to use a plugin for the first couple of times, I do actually find that it's quite nice to have presets to give me an idea of how other people have used these plugins, and especially something like a multi-band module like this where there's a lot to go at. I can throw up a preset that might just be close to what I had in mind in terms of setting the bands low, mid, high mid, and high, roughly the right amount of gains, the right amount of chosen compression per band. Then I can go to town adjusting things to what I need, which can save me a lot of time, which is a big part of my workflow. Is whatever saves you the most time is probably the best, as long as you get to where you were going in the first place. So like there's a Dynamics one called Master Bus, and it looks like it's a single band Dynamics that doesn't do much. Let's play a little bit of the background of the music. So, at the moment, what I've got, and what I've done in mastering tutorials before because of the whole copyright issue thing, is I've got a version which is on the right of the song that I did for the Rev G4 demo, which is an instrumental, which I may have to pull something up later that's got vocals in if we need to do that. But this is the very first mix, which is also what I would consider to be unmastered, and I'll play you a little bit of that. And that's pretty cool. And then if I bypass everything that's in Ozone, this will be significantly louder, so headphone warning if you jump at loud noises. This is going to be loud. So that is the very last version, which I did the kind of final limiting and processing for that in the mix project, which is something that I would not usually do for a client, but if I'm working on a track of my own for the YouTube channel, then that's something that I do tend to do as part of making the process rather fast. But I would have used Ozone 8 on that to get the final polish. So we have a mix reference, a master reference if you will, and then we have our original track to work with. So we've got our equalizer, which if I turn that on, hello? Oh, the whole thing's bypassed, yep. So everything's grayed out so that you know that you're not pressing the wrong buttons. That's quite useful. So if I reset my peak meters. I'm pretty sure that the peak levels there are not set right, but we'll see. RMS stereo, yep. Oh, so it's just RMS, so I could have RMS plus peak. Right, but RMS plus peak is generally useless because the peaks are going to be probably at -1 dB when we set our maximizer's ceiling appropriately, which we're going to do now. So the dynamics are the same as they've always been. Equalizer, there's now 2 of them. They don't call it equalizer and post EQ anymore because that was kind of silly. Wherever you want those EQs to be in your chain, you can now just put them wherever and just have them called equalizer. The exciter and imager are the same as they've always been. There's a new mode on stereoize, so if you want to make a big stereo sound out of a mono track, there's a new version. I wouldn't usually use it on a master, but let's try it. Didn't sound like it did much there, but that's probably just because it's not the right thing. So yeah, someone's, well, I'd say asked in chat, but they've just put a few words up. Difference between Ozone 8 and 9. That's exactly what this video is all about, pretty much. But I'm just going through the modules that are the same before I move on to ones that are new. So if you've used Ozone 8 Advanced, you'll have seen the vintage compressor, the vintage limiter, vintage EQ and vintage tape. Now out of those 4, the ones that I've used the most are the vintage EQ, which is very Pultec like. It's got these big broad sweeping bumps that even at 1 dB can be a huge difference because of the way that passive EQs work, and depending on which frequencies you choose, that can have a massive impact on the warmth of your mix, clarity. You can really change it. Are the presets any use? So what we're saying was, I've not looked yet at the overall presets. These seem to be the same presets largely, although there are some new ones looking at it, as there were in Ozone 8. But the per module presets are something that have always interested me and been far more useful for me. Because in mastering, you really shouldn't be trying to just throw a big preset over everything. Although having said that, we'll talk about the Master Assistant in a bit. The Master Assistant's very clever. But the reason I was talking about these vintage EQ, vintage limiter, vintage tape, they were all in the advanced version in 8. If you get Ozone 9 standard, the vintage modules now come with it as standard rather than having to pay for the advanced. Which is quite nice. It means you're not gatekeeped out of that. It seems to me that when iZotope make a new version of Ozone, the latest and greatest modules, the new things, are the advanced stuff. And then as time passes, they then become part of the standard repertoire and the new tools become the advanced again. So that seems to be how it's working. So there's new stuff. So the dynamic EQ I think came in Ozone 7. That's still pretty clever if I put a preset on this. Let's call it dynamic tape. What happens with the dynamic EQ is as you play and too much of a certain frequency comes in, it either gets boosted or cut depending on how you set the thing. So what that's doing there is that's just giving a little super low end bump, kind of a mid bump and a little cut in the bass there, but they're only happening when the volume gets to a certain level. When the volume's lower, you get that nice linear kind of thing, so it's very clever. So let's get rid of that module for a minute while we look at these new ones. So there's the low end focus. I thought this was very clever. If I just play a little bit of the track here, I can really pull out the kick drum or the bass. It's a very simple looking module, but it seems like what's going on underneath is much cleverer than the UI suggests. So I'm just going to hit play, and with the punchy setting on a low end focus, I'm going to add some contrast, and you'll suddenly feel the kick drum and everything really jump. Listen to this. And it also goes the other way with the contrast being negative. Let's say that you've got a great mix from somebody, but you feel like the kick drum in their mix is just a bit too much in the low end. So that bum, 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 bum is just too much, but the rest of the low end is nice. So you don't want to EQ out that frequency on the kick, because then the bass will be weak. Everything else in the low end will sound unnatural. You can just make the contrast less on the punchy mode here. Or I could go the other way, and let's say that the kick drum was nice and kind of solid in the mix, but lacked a bit of low end. But if I then tried to EQ out the low end, the bass guitar was too much, and then that was killing everything. We could use this, and the kick drum suddenly comes out. And you can actually see it lighting up there, algorithmically. And then if we go to smooth mode, let's go a little further on in the song. So that then, yeah, you can really bring out the low end, or you can, but not just the low end as a whole, which is what EQ affects, and not using a compression which can have its own artifacts, which may or may not be desirable. A question from the chat: so this is more a tool for correcting a mix rather than mastering as a pure art? Well, that can be a big part of mastering. And it really depends on what you're after. I mean, using a tool like this subtly in a mastering context could be the difference between a good master and a great master. But it's something that we've not seen before as a choice. I mean, the mix might be really good, but if it turns out, as I'm listening to it, that I go, you know what, that kick drum could have done with just a little more, I can then go punchy, just a few percent, just a little more, and I can focus that low end in. I think that's really, really nice to have as a tool, as a mastering engineer. Then I'll skip master rebalance for a second, because there's match EQ. Match EQ is something that's been there since all the way back to Ozone 4 or 5, but it was part of the equalizer module. It's now its own separate thing, which means you can position it separately from regular EQ. This is something I've always liked. If I turn off the other modules for a second, what I can do is have this big loud master reference, which in the real world I would use usually a published song by another artist. In this case, I'm using just another version of this mix just to avoid copyright issues, but I could put some sort of like Periphery song in here, or Pantera, or whoever. Just a couple of bands I thought of out of nowhere. And if that matches tone-wise, I can use this as a comparison tool. So let's just capture a little bit of this. Okay, now that's that captured. Stop. So that yellow line is our capture. If I turn on the other modules, let's say, for instance, we've already done most of our mastering on the mix here. If I then capture what that sounds like, okay, so they are different volume-wise. You can see that one is up or down compared to the other. And then from there, we can save them. And yeah, you see there's a very subtle EQ bump. If I turn the amount up, you'll see usually you probably don't want to use more than maybe 10%. These EQs are very similar to begin with because it's the same song. But usually you'll find there's quite a difference. But what you can do, I tend to use this as an educational thing rather than actually using the match EQ. What I tend to do is do this capture, see what it's telling me, and go from there and say, oh, well, maybe I should, in the mix, have bumped up there. Maybe I had a little too much at 80 Hz. Maybe I could have boosted the entire EQ earlier in the signal chain in that region, and then come back and compare to my reference. Question from David Ross. What's my philosophy on mastering? Should it not be up to the mix engineer to make dynamic adjustments and the job of the mastering engineer to make it suitable for various formats? Depends. Really depends. Mastering, if someone is mixing and they're available and I can talk to them on the phone, via Skype, in person, then it's much more mastering about me doing the very final polish of just comparing to other releases, subtle EQ tweaks to make them match so it doesn't sound too dull compared to other mediums and that kind of thing. Yes, it can be very softly, but mastering can also be things like a best of album where you've got songs with different volumes, different amounts of bass, middle, treble, different balances entirely because they were produced over years. A lot of the mixes there may well be permanent because they're on tape, or the mix engineer might be no longer with us, or any number of reasons. Quite often we have to be able in mastering to do a lot of this kind of stuff, even if we prefer as often as possible not to do a lot of this stuff. It's like anything. You need all these tools in your arsenal, even though you would much prefer not to have to use any of them. But when you do, it's really good to have them there. Makes it much easier to work. And something like Match EQ here, I find, isn't necessarily fixing a mix. It's telling me visually when I've done what I need to do, how far off I was from the reference that the client wanted. In terms of something quite pure like a statistical readout, I might look at this, listen to my reference, listen to my mix, and go, you know what? No, the master that I've done does sound slightly different from the reference, and that's okay. That's an experience thing. That's a mastering engineer's prerogative. But I might also have a second thought and go, you know what, after the work I've done, maybe I did need a little more mid there, a bit less bass there, because something like Ozone really is designed for mastering engineers in the fact that, if you look at the regular equalizer, I'll put a massive bump in there. That's only 3 decibels. That's a 3 dB sweep, and it looks like on any other EQ, like a 12 dB sweep or more. It looks like it's massive. And in a mastering perspective, this 3 dB is massive. But we're encouraged by its design not to be ham-fisted and to be very subtle in what we're doing. So I'm getting off topic too much. Don't want to talk about too much of that today. I have talked about a lot of this in the last tutorial I did, which was with Ozone 8. I'm going to do a new updated one with version 9 over the next couple of weeks, in which I'll talk about a lot of this kind of stuff, mastering philosophy and what have you. Let's just talk about what's new and what's funky and what's cool for today, including the Spectral Shaper. Now, I didn't really know what this one was for at first, because this one seems a little bit like, okay, what do you do then? And you can adjust tone, attack and release, either light, medium or heavy, on a part of the spectrum. Now what does that mean that's different from just an EQ? And that's where the presets came in. So I tried overhead harshness reduction and played that back. Let's just turn off that match EQ and the low end focus and dynamics so we can hear much clearer what the Spectral Shaper's doing. Let's overdo it. Okay, or there's the clean sub preset, which goes all the way down to 20 to 40 hertz, and apparently by increasing the tone and having attack and release set in a certain way, that helps to eliminate sub-frequencies, but without using the classic brick wall limiter, which is brick wall EQ even, which is the way that I've always done it with my second EQ, which is, for me, usually a part of the mastering process. Unless I'm working on, you know, a club mix for something, I'll tend to have high pass brick wall, maybe 30 something hertz, and that does screw around with the phase a little bit, and that's actually quite nice that I can see a little ripple there where it's kind of honest with me about what it's doing. Oh, Marty has a good point. Yes, it's perfect for small to medium media productions on the streaming channels, for instance, where DIY makes a difference in cost. Yes, so it's the kind of thing where if you were to do everything and do your own mastering, you could then use references to learn how to not only improve a master, but actually improve a mix by this giving you feedback. Anywho, back to the Spectral Shaper, what else can it do? Let's look at their presets again. Hello presets, there they are. So you can do things like darken lead vocals, remove resonances to increase focus on vocal range. How do you say that? Oh, I've angered the gods now. Oh, that's why. Let's turn off the maximizer. Yeah, so this Spectral Shaper alone is eating 13-14% of my processor. Wow. Which is why it sounds like it's getting old. Excuse me, stop now. It's getting grindy at that point. If I turn that module off. It's still using a lot. Let's get rid of these modules entirely. And yeah, watch the CPU usage that was down there drop like a stone. So that's something to be aware of, is the new tools are very CPU intensive. Now this laptop's also trying to do a live stream at the same time, which is probably why it panicked there, but yeah, these are some very clever tools. There's Master Rebalance, which apparently changes the focus. Apparently this works, or is it the tone? It works with the tonal balance in Neutron and other things. So if you're using Ozone on your master bus in a project that's got other things going on, apparently it does things like it can pull up and down the bass and drums in tandem with other plugins. So the last thing is the Master Assistant has changed. So the Master Assistant is this AI mastering version. So now we get a choice of using the modern plugins modules or the vintage modules. We get to do the loudness between low, medium and high intensity. Or we can use the reference, loader reference tracking. So let's use a Carnival track, the FLAC version, thank you very much. Let it do that for a second. And then we get a choice of either streaming or CD. CD's got a slightly higher limiter on the volume. That's taking a while to load that, but then it is an absolute monster. There we go. So choose reference, yes, next, and then hit play on my track and watch the magic. Sorry everybody, I'm going to turn that down because, whoa, that got loud fast. Let's just try that again, because I think I stopped it halfway through. Oh, killed it. No, I know it wasn't clipping on your side because I actually have a limiter in OBS that was stopping it from clipping on your side. But if it blew my headphones out, then I'm sure it would make a couple of people jump. So apologies for that. Looks like doing that twice made Ozone crash. So, oh, right, okay. Let's load up Ozone again and try that one more time. See if we get different results by playing at a different section of the song. Because the one thing I didn't let it do at the end there was use the dynamic EQ to actually make the limiter sound clearer again. Which is a very clever way I think it was trying to do it. So I'm going to turn the output volume down. Master Assistant. Load reference track. Yeah, destination streaming. Because the actual Carnival track that I'm using as a reference goes all the way up, I think, to nearly 0 dB and just smashes the loudest parts. Although the quietest parts of that song are a lot quieter because it's a very dynamic track. So if I hit next, hit play. See, now it's bypassing the dynamics, saying no extreme dynamic range. Okay, so maximizer frequency dependent gain reductions. Let's see how this sounds absolutely slammed. Sweet Jesus, it set that to be about -4 dB RMS. Let's take that down by several decibels. lots of bass in Carnival. Does that change your track? Not looking at it really. It looks like, I mean, I've been listening to that Carnival album for quite a while. It's become one of my main mix references. So it looks like it's taken my low end down a touch and my low mid range up a bit, which I'm quite often quite guilty of not having too much in the low mid range. I do need a bit more of a kick. It's not done any dynamics processing by itself. It's got a few dampeners here. Could probably be a bit louder than that overall, but I don't want it to be 16 dB of limiting. Gee whiz. Now the thing is, the loudest parts of those Carnival tracks are audibly slammed. But it seems to be part of the style because their arrangements are so dynamic, the loud bits are really loud and the rest of it's not nearly that loud. But other than that, I think yeah. Most Carnivals in drop C sharp. Well, everything Carnival is anywhere down to B. Simple Boys in B, I think. Yeah, it's in B. A lot of their stuff is quite low. But low shouldn't make much difference to tonal balance. Because of the way that bass actually behaves in the real world. When you get that low, you don't tend to hear much of the fundamental anyway, and the way that an amp has processed that so that it comes out in the high harmonics is a story for another day. But I've been looking at this for quite a while now, and so I'm gonna retire to the drawing room for the evening. But hopefully you've enjoyed the first look at this. That there's interesting things like the Master Assistant seems a lot better than it used to be. That was almost usable apart from being way too loud. And there are other modules I can now play with, which I don't even know if they're included in that Master Assistant. But then there's the vintage stuff, which I didn't choose. There's the Spectral Shaper. And there's so much to play with, and I'm going to do that in front of proper lighting, proper cameras, during the week, get that edited and get that out to your eyes as soon as I can. So, hopefully you enjoyed watching this. Thank you everybody, I'm Adam Steele for Hot Pole Studios, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.